Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here joining us for Havana Art and Culture with Reemberto Rodriguez. I know, Reemberto, we have a record number of registrants for this program tonight, but we are also doing this Facebook Live. And you can watch it at our Silver Spring Town Center Facebook group later. So we're so excited to hear about Reemberto's teaching at UMD, the same course. This is like a highlights of the course that we get to see tonight. So it'll be an exciting program to hear about. And I understand it's already filled to capacity. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you about a couple other things SSTCI has coming up. And please be sure to mute yourself. And if you are a co-host, maybe you could help me mute. One of my board members is here. Maybe Lauren can help me. Anyway, we have a couple other events coming up before the end of the year, including a new trio of comedy shows hosted by Stacy Axler, Most Loved Comics. So we have a diversity of comics lined up for Wednesday, the 15th at 8 o'clock. And then on Wednesday, the 22nd, we have a program that I host. It's our Travelogue series where you share about a favorite place in the world you've visited in like a rapid fire share storytelling and photo share of a few photos from a special place in the world. And this time we are focusing on holy sites around the globe. So I hope you can join us Wednesday, the 22nd. And we are also asking that people contribute as they do each year at the end of the year to include us in your end of year giving. We cannot do all that we do without you. A donation of any amount will be doubled by a match from our donors up to $3,000. So please take part. I'll put it in the chat. It's our PayPal link. And we greatly appreciate your support so that we can help keep our community connected and creatively engaged. And finally, all of our events are made possible with generous support from Montgomery County, United Therapeutics, the Arts and Humanities of Montgomery County, and many others. And now let's get to the program with former Silver Spring Regional Center Director, AKA Mayor of Silver Spring, now in retirement, enjoying himself, Reemberto Rodriguez.
Well,
Happy to have you, Reemberto.
Lisa, gracias. I mean, this is, and I see but from the list of participants, the ones I have checked in are growing. Lots of good friends, and so frankly, this I feel there's a high comfort level here in saying I would want to give each and every one of you a hug here, because some of you I haven't seen in a while, so it's fantastic to have you here. And so without delay, we're going to jump into this conversation. But the first part of the conversation will be a presentation. The presentation will go on for somewhere between, let's say, around 40 minutes or so. We'll try. It is going to be fast paced. It is going to be going all over the map, and we're going to try to do a couple of different techniques of Zoom technology, hoping they work. If they don't, we'll just back up and continue. The gist of the presentation is will be some slides and hopefully some videos. So again, welcome one and all. But before we start, just wanted to explain to you why that's my background. That is since we're talking about art and culture, this is my family's coat of arms. I designed it, and it was done by about 10 years ago by a stained glass artist from nearby. And it basically, you see the pine trees and the palm trees, which are together, which are represent Cuba and the South where I grew up, the Appalachian Mountain and the beaches, again, representing the two places, and the magnolia tree and the mango trees. And then you see the little bird, which is Zunzun, the smallest mockingbird in the world, and a cigar and a there which is still burning, and a sun which is either setting or rising depending on where you are psychologically at the moment. So that's the way, my way of introducing myself. And so we're going to get on with the show here, okay? Again, welcome. Bienvenidos, buenas noches. Look, Havana is not a museum. To understand the present and deliberate the future, you must understand the past. Havana is a vibrant, alive, and ever-changing city like no other, dare I say, in the world. Check me out on this. No other city in the last 60 years has evolved quite like Havana. No historic city in the world has avoided the growth of new high-rises evident in their skyline like Havana. No historic city in the world has deteriorated with collapsing buildings and disinvestment in the absence of physical war like Havana. Almost every major skyline in the world is accentuated by skyscrapers built in the last few decades. Of course, our own backyard, Washington, D.C., is a rare exception. Most every major city that has collapsed in history is in the last 100 years is the result of war. Not Havana. Let's take a 5-minute aerial journey of this majestic city. And this is where we shift to a video. So bear with us as we do the logistics. And Lisa, check me out. Let me know if the sound is okay. Welcome back. Basically, this conversation with Silver Spring Town Center, Inc. is a synopsis of a course to be offered at the University of Maryland this coming short winter semester, January 3rd to the 21st. We're happy to announce that the course is actually full. Students jumped on it, but stay tuned for other opportunities. The course, like the synopsis today, will explore the disciplines of architecture, urban planning, historic preservation, and economics and real estate development in Havana, Cuba. For more on this, send me an email, and we're glad to happy to communicate with you. We are glad to be joined today by at least one of our co-instructors. I was unable to look at all the registrants, but Manela Diaz is with us, and she'll be joining us for the Q&A afterwards. So, which way Havana? Will the cruise ship crush the classic car, or will Havana ride into the sunset on a set of new wheels? We just don't know. And tonight, by the way, I want to make this really upfront, is not the conversation to dive into the politics of the moment, though current events are inescapable in most any discussion about Cuba. Yet we'll try. If you'd like to talk more about the politics, send me an email and we can set up something else at another time, preferably at a local brewery. So, first, we want to take a fast survey through these four disciplines: architecture, planning, preservation, and economics. Then we will examine how they intersect in art, culture, and society. Havana's architecture ranges from the colonial to contemporary, including some of the finest collection of iconic buildings from the first part of the 20th century, Art Deco jewels, and much more. By the way, I would like to reiterate that all the pictures you're seeing, not the videos, but the pictures are my own, taken over the last 6 years when I've returned to Cuba for every New Year's Eve except last year. Thanks in a big way to Manela Diaz, who's joining us today and will join us again for the Q&A. Havana's crown jewel, architectural crown jewel, is its recently renovated neoclassical capital and nearby similar era masterpieces. We'll say more about the capital's preservation efforts later. This is actually some of the inside of the Capitol. The details of these buildings are simply exquisite. Inside and out, representing an era of public and private investment in pre-Great Depression Cuba. Early colonial architecture still permeates the cities and the streets and scenes of old Havana, dating back to its early port days of the 16th and 17th century. Art Deco and similar styles are to be found throughout Havana as well. This is the Bacardi building, and until someone tells me differently, that's the original bat of the movie Batman up there, the Bacardi Batman. So then the 50s brought to Havana a new wave of buildings, including some of the buildings that continue defining Havana's skyline to this day. Now these buildings were, how these buildings were funded and the mafia connection is for a longer conversation, and again, probably best over a bottle of wine or a mojito. However, it's critical to highlight that most prominent throughout the city of Havana is the, quote, architecture of necessity. That is, making do to create spaces out of precarious situations, some buildings falling, others being broken into 2 stories, etc. But now let's go on to urban planning.
now open in
Let's shift to urban planning. How did Havana come to be? How is it laid out?
at Starbucks where history was made.
But first, just where is Havana? Most of us know, but just as a reminder, Havana is on the northern coast of Western Cuba, the largest of the archipelago islands of the Antilles. Havana is the entry point to the Gulf of Mexico, less than 100 miles from Key West, Florida. Havana is a city of neighborhoods, barrios. These have emerged through the ages. Many actually have songs dedicated to them. The first neighborhood was La Habana Vieja, Old Havana, at the western part of the mouth of the bay. Then came Centro Habana to the west, then the plush residential neighborhoods of El Vedado and Marianao and many others. To the east is La Habana del Este, a story unto itself, as it is a classic Eastern Bloc type neighborhood with Soviet-style architecture, a failed planning model not unique to Havana. Scattered throughout Havana are what may seem like modern-day ruins, yet it's crucial to understand that these are where people live their lives and do their daily businesses. 5 plazas define Old Havana. These are all within walking distance of each other and are typical of the Spanish plazas that dot Spain and all its colonies. These have been augmented by major gathering spaces for public assembly. One of the most prominent is the appropriated renamed Plaza de la Revolución, where Fidel Castro famously gave his 5+ hour speeches. More apropos to this conversation is one of my favorite plaza, La Plaza de San Francisco. If you see that church in the background, it now houses a performing arts center. Indeed, the orchestra in the video we watched earlier was filmed inside that space. Dotting Havana are major landmarks, including the second largest cemetery in the Americas, Colón, second only to Buenos Aires, Recoleta. Other major landmarks include the Capitol and the University of Havana. Then there are 20+ museums and bars that have become world famous, like La Floridita and La Bodeguita del Medio, Hemingway's favorite. And of course, the iconic El Morro, which is a mandatory watch fort in all of Spanish colonial cities, from San Agustin to others throughout Latin America. This here is another fortification, not El Morro, La Fortaleza San Carlos de la Cabaña, across from the bay from Havana's skyline. Havana's most famous path is El Malecón, which parallels the Caribbean Sea, and Obispo, the most touristy streets in Old Havana. And of course, El Paseo del Prado, a beautiful tree-lined pedestrian path adorned with bronze lions. Havana's urban form is also defined by the many Catholic churches, including the world's famous cathedral. Many other churches are sprinkled throughout the city with their spires defining the surrounding neighborhoods. You'll note that the cathedral is was used as the main place and main picture to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Havana. And actually the t-shirt I have on is also celebrating the 500th anniversary of Havana, as we were there, as it was being celebrated a couple of years ago. There's actually a model of Havana in Havana that provides intricate details of the layout of the city. This is a superbly large model with each and every building meticulously reproduced. And then we move on to historic preservation. Old Havana became a UNESCO site in the late 70s. Its administration is in the hands of the Office of the Historian, which is actually an office established back in 1938 in Havana. Havana's many historic jewels are truly almost unique in the world. Some have been restored, others are being restored as we speak. Most, however, remain languishing in the elements with little resources for even basic maintenance, much less restoration. The crown jewel, as mentioned earlier, of the restoration effort is the recently renovated Capitol, the principal historical seat of government that's basically empty for decades and is now reclaimed as a major tourist attraction. While externally similar to the US Capitol, it is not a replica. And, may I say, it is 1 meter taller than the US Capitol. It was built just before the Great Depression, and it became Havana's tallest building until the 1950s. The aforementioned San Cristobal de Colón Cemetery is also a precious jewel to be preserved. If you've been to New Orleans, think of those cemeteries in steroids. And of course, the Havana's earliest fortress or its defining building, and the most prominent being El Morro at the mouth of the bay. This view is one of the most photographs in Havana. There are countless other buildings of historic significance throughout the city that merit preserving, including majestic residences, some of which may already be lost, but many which can still be saved. Of course, all of this takes capital, and Cuba's economic system is a complex system in which to do real estate development. While there are signs of construction throughout the city, most of the new construction is hotels financed by external partners and creating a fascinating, unique situation and version of gentrification. If you were to go to Google Maps and Google hotels in Havana, you will see an array of styles and range of options, and some very recently constructed. So where do these disciplines intersect, if not, of course, in art and culture? Where else? So now we're going to stop sharing here a minute, and we're going to see our second video. And please bear with me as we we will our second video is coming on its way, is Ireno Garcia, Andar por La Habana. This video is not well known and is not viewed a lot, but it is a beautiful composition of and I'll share it. I'll be back to sharing in a second. Lisa, are you hearing it?
Yes, we hear. We don't
You're
see
not
anything.
seeing it. Okay,
No.
all right. That's good old technology. We'll get there. We'll get
Yep.
there. It is. You know what, Lisa? Let me see.
Yes.
We did briefly.
Did you click share screen again? Do share screen. I think you need to click it again.
Okay, so you guys bear with me. Think of all the beautiful scenes you've seen, and we'll be right there with you to share this. You can hear it, but can you see it?
se muda a Maneco. Vamos solo tú y yo, que atravesando gente.
Just audio, Reemberto.
Just audio. Okay, you can listen to it for a little while. It's a nice song.
Vamos a andar la mano, pegándonos al mar, bojeando zanja que una vez fue China en un portal. Cruzar Galeano y descansar en el parque central. Tomar obispo sin dudar hasta la catedral. Vamos a andar la Habana, amor, pegándonos al mar. Apunta el día y la ciudad se quiere levantar.
There.
Yes, there it is.
Ya sale el sol de su balcón, dorando una canción. Vamos a andar la Habana, amor, siempre buscando el mar, siempre buscando el mar, siempre buscando el mar.
And I'll share these with you, all these links to these different videos, so you can see them at your leisure as well. Okay. All right. So here we now continue. I wanted to digress here, not digress, but a key part of this presentation is understanding the major influencing factors in all four disciplines. Otherwise, you will be talking about all of this totally in void of reality. And this, by the way, is applicable not only to Havana, but of course to every major city in the world, including, dare I say, Silver Spring, Maryland. So here I go. First, you have the regulatory environment. This refers to the laws, rules, and regulations. Cuba recently actually adopted a new constitution. This is no simple document. It has 256 articles. Its implementations and interpretation is spotty at best. As the culture learns how to navigate the balancing act of aspirational language and practical matters, Cuban law also specifies allowable professions, businesses, and trades. Interestingly, neither architecture nor travel agencies are technically allowed. Recourse for grievances remains a challenge in the Cuban legal system, which has limited provisions for legal representation. And then you have to talk about the investors and owners. To understand how the disciplines of architecture, planning, and preservation and economics work, it's important to understand who can invest and own assets. Private ownership remains a highly regulated provision in Cuba. The last decade has seen a significant opening to private enterprises and certain small businesses, albeit limited in size and limited in allowance and capacity to grow or franchise. However, investment in major traditional real estate development, at the moment mostly hotels, is reserved for international conglomerates in partnerships with the government, who must control over 50% of interest. Not an uncommon requirement in many world economies. The Cuban government has set up its own corporation, which owns and manages most of the tourism in the island. Again, not uncommon in other third world countries. This same corporation is the agent for international investment. And then access to capital necessary for asset building, real estate development, or infrastructure is limited almost exclusively to government instruments. Entrepreneurship and small business development is funded generally through family remittances, which remain a fluctuating area of the economy. For example, most restaurants, plates, pots, and pans, and utensils are brought over by visiting families. This challenging access to capital has considerably hindered the growth of small businesses industry. However, literally as we speak, Cuba is encouraging the creation of private businesses of up to 100 employees. So stay tuned for that. And lastly is the political reality. Cuba's political reality shapes these other factors and impacts the pragmatic application of the 4 disciplines discussed in this course. Cuba remains a centralized government with heavy top-down bureaucracy and little space for local decision-making. Each of these factors intersect each of the disciplines independently and collectively to form a complex web of what is Havana. And of course, they all intersect in art and culture. And here are some examples. This pictorial juxtaposition is exhibited in the Fábrica de Artes Cubano, which we'll revisit in a bit. This juxtapositioning reflects the angst of a future unknown and the dire consequences of unchecked tourism. One takeaway I wish you will remember from this conversation today is that Havana is so much more than the caricature of mojitos and old cars. Havana is also a people that love to get together to just be, and a people that is always experimenting in the arts. Havana's contemporary art and culture is exemplified not only in the vibrant street scenes that you see in touristy places, but also in its magnificent museums and performance spaces. Here are some art pieces that we could discuss and dissect for hours. On the upper right is the Alicia Alonso Theater, a magnificent performance space where we actually experienced the Nutcracker a couple of years ago. Contemporary art in Havana is alive and well, as demonstrated by this piece at the Museum of Contemporary Art. Then there is La Fábrica de Artes Cubanos, a place like no other. Think torpedo factory on steroids, and then multiply it times 100, and you begin to get the picture of what this space is like. A unique space, dare I say, I think in the world, of converted oil factory, not oil in the ground, but olive oil type factory, and with multiple spaces for all sorts of art, as well as performance venue. Now, in conclusion, there's a lot going on in Cuba and outside of Cuba about Cuba. Things are changing. They've always been changing. For 500 years, Havana has evolved. For example, nothing speaks louder to the negative change that the Trump administration made than this comparative picture of the American embassy taken 4 years apart at the beginning and at the end of the Trump administration. The picture of the torn flag is taken from a photograph at the Fábrica de Artes Cubanos. And this one I have to get right, because this video, which is the last video we'll see, is incredibly fun. So I hope we'll be able to watch it without much problem here. In the meantime, Lisa, are you still with us?
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, me specifically. Wow. Gosh. No, I was just reflecting on how much our diplomacy had made some progress over the years, and it was just shameful to see our flags removed and just no presence there. Yeah, so it's
And you yourself have been to Cuba, Lisa, right?
no. Actually, no. I almost went illegally a long time ago, but I chickened out because I was at the time, thinking of applying to work at the State Department in cultural affairs. So So I haven't been yet, but I'm planning to go. I think you should organize a group trip for SSTCI because I have so many people in our community who keep asking me, when is Reemberto going to lead us on a trip to Cuba?
Okay, let's see. You're seeing the video here, right?
Havana, crazy, welcome to the capital. La Habana, un bello pueblo, que La Habana no aguanta más. La Habana sí, que sí, seguro que sí, que sí.
La Habana sí, La Habana tiene ganas de que la cuiden, que se pongan para ella. La Habana entera quiere ser la capital más bella de América Latina, de América Latina. La Habana sí, La Habana tiene un pueblo que ella trabaja en la remodelación. La Habana entera quiere ser la capital más bella de América Latina, de América Latina. La Habana sí, La Habana siempre lista, ciudad de tradiciones, tiene que la bien bonita. La Habana entera debe ser la capital más bella de América Latina, de América Latina. La Habana sí, que sí, sí, que sí. La Habana sí, habanero soy de cepa porque en La Habana sí, que sí, 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 que sí. La Habana, La Habana, La Habana, La Habana, mi hermano, vuelve de todos los cubanos. De La Habana sí, 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 cuidado. En La Habana llegarás a prueba con su león. La Habana sí, que sí.
te imaginas que los leones, La Habana así, ra, 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 ra. Ay, mi madre. Ay, Dios mío, vamos a usar, chacho, La Habana. ¿Qué va a vista esa, compadre? Esta es La Habana de Juan. Y en serio. Esta es La Habana de los cubanos. Seguro que sí.
Just want to challenge you all to name me another song that ends by invoking the historian of a place. So so it's really quite something to see, to see that that song. Some folks that follow Cuban music may recognize that's Los Bambang, a uniquely Cuban band that created a unique sound in modern day Cuban music. Actually they've played at here locally in DC. Went to see them at the Howard Theater a couple of years, about 4 years ago.
Which
And
group, Reemberto? Which group is it?
Los Bang Bang, V-A-N.
Van. Okay.
Yeah, and so and so it's really I want to reiterate. I want to totally reiterate, please, that my intent in sharing this presentation with you is to be neither nostalgic nor a forward-looking in any whatever way, but it's rather to celebrate an urban place that's been here for 500 years and has gone basically through many changes. And I'm proud to have been back again. I'm proud to have never spent a New Year's in Trump's America, except last year, but that wasn't really his. So which way, Havana? One thing is for certain, this brave and unique city, which has survived for over 5 centuries, will continue adapting to whatever realities come its ways, always finding a way to hold its head up high, maintain its dignity, and reinvent itself while reimagining and remaining grounded in its rich history and deep tradition, and celebrating a people inside and outside the island that may be bruised and hurt, but never defeated. In the meantime, we journey, not as tourists, but as fellow Cubans. We journey and we take friends and we go with friends that are not interested in just another touristry gig, but rather in understanding a people that have been brave come hell or high water. And we relate to the people in Cuba in a personable way, always respecting the past, living in the inescapable present, and looking forward to a better tomorrow. So with that, Lisa, gracias. And sorry about the glitch with the videos. I'll send you guys all of them and all of that so you can watch them at your own pace. But I hope this has helped. And now I don't know how you want to handle the questions.
Muchas gracias. Wow. Yeah, we have time for questions and conversation. I was muted when you asked, was the song that you asked if we could think of another song that talks about the history of Cuba?
No, my point was I do have a playlist that I'll share with you guys of about 21 songs. And actually, this is quite a test here with this amazing group of people that I don't know of any other city other than Paris and New York that has so much a wealth of actually relatively contemporary songs, love songs. And so these videos that I'll share with you on the playlist are love songs to Havana. dating back decades, okay, dating back to the 40s and the 50s. So,
yeah, I mean, I have the first question. I'll kick us off since we have people raising their hand, but since I'm up, I just wonder, having served in the Peace Corps in a former Soviet communist country of Estonia, how, and I saw how the people were beaten down, you know, it was, people were very restrained in their behavior and emotions and very almost, you know, very holding back is the word in Estonian, tagasihoidlik, which means holding back, but they weren't encouraged to express themselves and or be creative or you know, inquisitive. Yet you see, I mean, even in spite of the repression, the political repression that they've experienced there and continue to experience and endure, they're still so, you know, vibrant and joyous, seemingly joyous. I'm sure there's suffering underneath. But I mean, how do you explain that they've been so resilient and able to maintain this?
excellent question, Lisa. And I said up front that I am going to try extremely hard not to divert to politics, okay?
Right.
And so in countries throughout the world, we see art and culture flourish in the darkest and deepest of moments, particularly art. And I actually, relating it to Silver Spring, I'm working with Tom Block from Silver Spring, who heads up the International Human Rights Arts Festival in New York, to see to it that that organization is reflective of a broader constituency of countries where art is clamped down and where art is challenging. The art world in Cuba is alive and well with its challenges. For example, every 2 years there's a major art show in Cuba, and this year's art show was boycotted by many Cuban artists inside and outside the island. Also, artists have some of the key artists in Cuba have gone into exile, and some in Cuba have gotten into trouble and jailed for their participation in in an artistic song that became the anthem of the Cuban protests, which has its genesis a year ago in the San Isidro movement, which is a group of artists protesting for more expression. So art is inseparable. Art is social change, and how we navigate the challenges, be it in situations like Cuba, and no false equivalency here, please. So don't throw a virtual whatever at me. But in the U.S., how the challenges that art has to survive is in a system that art is only thrives when it's paid for. So there's the art defines culture, which is the point I've tried to make in this intersection of architecture, planning, preservation, and economics.
Okay, great. And now I see there are several people in line with their hands up. I'll go to the first one is Sonia Connolly. Hi, Sonia.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. I went to ask you to unmute and then I muted you. Sorry. Go ahead. There you go.
Okay. Hi, Roberto. Thank you for this great presentation. So I have a twofold question. I have been wanting to go to Cuba for a very long time, and I was very, very close to going several years ago, around the time of the incidents, I call them incidents at the embassies, where the people that worked at embassies said that they had, they didn't know whether it was biological or chemical based. Do you think that that was a real situation or something that was fabricated by the Trump administration? And then my second question is, do you think that through the Montgomery College, you would lead a group to Cuba, and how would one be kept informed of such an eventuality?
Thank you, Sonia. Good questions. I'll answer the last one first, and then I'll dance around the first one. Going to Cuba with folks from Silver Spring is totally a dream of mine, and some of us have talked about it over literally cigars in my backyard and rum and cokes at El Sapo and other restaurants and drinking beer at Denison's. And so that would be a dream come true. I really would warn folks regarding going to Cuba as tourists, because you are literally dishonoring the people of Cuba by doing that. By the way, I'm not saying don't, for crying out loud, don't enjoy it. I mean, of course you enjoy it, but go with understand what you're stepping into and understand that the challenges. And so it is very, I would caution about, and I'll name names here, from National Geographic's, who does an excellent photographic tour, to others, they avoid some of the real complexities of exchanging with the real people of Cuba. And so I would love to talk to folks in Silver Spring about doing something 2023, no sooner. And so that's that. To your first question, look, I mean, you know as much as I do about this, this weird noises in Havana that led to some folks getting actually sick, including Ben Rhodes, one of you may or may not, it's one of Obama's key individuals that negotiated the deal with to reestablish diplomatic relationships with Cuba. So who done it? My vote is Russia, and to instigate and mess up things. So that's my personal opinion. I have no clue. Okay, next question.
Okay, the next person in line was Walter. Okay, Walter Carlton, if you could unmute. There you
Reemberto.
go.
Hey, Walter.
Just remuted me. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, now yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. So here's my one-minute guide to Havana bought in 2001 in inspiration for happened because I guess I want to make this a competition. Lisa,
Walter, try turning your video off to see if you get more bandwidth.
Okay. Can you hear?
Are you on another device as well? Maybe, or do you have different options for your Wi-Fi connection? Because I have to use 5G in the living room, but a different one in the bedroom.
Let me try. I was actually projecting onto my television while you were showing the videos and stuff. Hopefully that improved things.
Yes.
Okay, so like Lisa, I spent fairly significant amount of time in Eastern Europe after Czech Republic and Poland. And so while you're talking about Havana, I'm thinking about other cities that I've lived in, Prague and Warsaw. And I've had the opportunity to see them transform over 30-year. I mean, my first visit to Prague was in 1990, and I was just there a couple months ago again. And it's changed tremendously. I mean, since the end of communism. And I mean, Prague, I would also say I've seen Washington, D.C. transform amazingly since my childhood, for good and bad. I guess my question is that, so there's been a lot of, I guess, sort of, it was the Wild East when I was living there in the 90s. There was a lot of outside, people looking for cheap property and, scooping up things. And basically, a lot of great architecture there has been preserved, but it's also kind of lost its soul, is my impression. Like Prague, just Old Town Prague is just, it's a tourist shopping mall, basically, of trinkets and things like that. I just don't, when it was more run down, it had a little more of the soul of the city. And I would anticipate if there would be a change in Cuba, something similar might happen there. I'm just wondering if you think there's a third way.
Well, I think it's again, I started out by saying that Havana is not a museum, and change has been happening to not acknowledge that it had the Havana has not been static. It hasn't been like, this is it. Yep. So there has been, particularly in the last 20 years, substantive, meaningful change in the world of asset management, development, nowhere near the wild west, or I love how you put it, Walter, the wild east of what happened in Eastern Europe. And the pace of change, balancing the pace of change and the nostalgic. You see, this is my concern, is that people will be so nostalgic about the past that it will inhibit the future.
Yeah. And
so how the people that live in Havana want to see their, they're not zoo animals in cages. I hate it when people go to Havana or any other tourist city for that matter, and look at the folks from those places as if they were looking through the glass of a zoo. And so how will that continue to change? How will, I mentioned the hotels being built. We're talking about 12 hotels being built with international investment. The Cuban government, through its corporate entity, remains in ownership. These were all planned before the pandemic. Let's see how that plays out after the pandemic. And how much of that can you do in a society that is essentially closed to diversity of spaces for civic discourse? It's anybody's guess. I think there is unanimity in most people that care about the Cubans in Cuba that change has to come, and that change has to be in tune with what the people in Cuba, the people of Cuba in Cuba seek. Nebulous answer. But
I know it's an unanswerable question, really, I think. But just one quick follow-up question: is China active in Cuba? I noticed.
Oh my God! Great question, and great to the point of architecture, planning, preservation, and economics. Because those of us that were fortunate enough, I think there's somebody else on this call, to go to Ethiopia years back on the Sister Cities program with the county, or those of us that have been to other places, Geraldina, my wife, to Africa before the pandemic. China is the great 21st century colonizer.
Yeah.
They
They're in
come-
Jamaica. I know they're heavily invested in Jamaica. So I know they're in the Caribbean.
And
Yeah.
in Cuba, in particular, they're most active through the ownership of the TV cable system distribution. And so, and through the provision of tourist buses. And so but this is not only related to Cuba. I think what China is doing in Africa and in some places in Latin America, and definitely in Cuba, is culturally abhorrent.
Mhm. But they're a source of capital that's not coming from the West.
Right.
Okay, I've taken up enough time. Thank you.
Next.
Okay, the next person up is Ken Roseman.
Reemberto,
Hey,
it's been
Ken.
a while. I hope you are well and being safe. I thought the architecture was really beautiful, and it was great to see a city that has not been taken over by McDonald's and such. I would like to visit. I have no idea what it'd be like. Michael Moore, in his documentary Sicko, pointed out that the healthcare system was really good. Of course, I want to know, and I did want to know if you had visited. You already answered that question. I want to know what kinds of music are really popular there. What is native? Is it possible to access stuff from other places? Are there lots of different kinds of bands in Havana and elsewhere in Cuba?
Yeah, let me go there. But before I got to correct you, okay? Michael Moore's conclusion are hogwash. I don't think Michael Moore ever set foot in a real hospital in Cuba. But that's for that other discussion, drinking beer at Denison's. The modern day Cuba music, absolutely. Indeed, there is this young man who did, his name is Cimafunk, Cimafunk, who has brought together the best of funk with Cuban beat, and in spent 6 months in a what do you call it, studying at the New York City's under George Clinton, of all people, and he made a video with George Clinton. So the Cuban music continues to move forward. It's not just the nostalgic 1950s, 1960s music. So, and the amount of people, I mean, in the video, Patria y Vida, it's 5 different groups of people representing at least 5 different groups singing this one song, and they each have their own sound. So the Cuban music continues in the island, continues to evolve in a very robust way.
Could there be influences from like Spanish stuff, like flamenco?
That traditionally, that's where it's come from. Traditional flamenco, French. That's where it has some horns but the Cuban music in the island is as diverse as the Cuban music in most any other country in the world, and the Cuban music in the island is very rooted in its African, and Henry Belafonte said it best. The Cuban music is the marriage of the Spanish guitar with the African drum.
That makes sense.
I'll leave it at that.
We're going to have to carry on about this. I think that in general, this has been an amazing session, one of the best Lisa has ever done. And I would like to visit, man. I just turned 70. I don't know what opportunities I'm going to have to do anything, but it looks like a combination of Boston and London, but with a Spanish Latin accent.
I'll take that. Good
Okay.
observation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I wonder how much responsibility Fidel has for that, but man, there's so many questions I could ask you. So.
Okay, great question about music, Ken. And next up, we have Vivian Royale.
Yes, I just wanted to say I enjoyed everything. Everything was beautiful. the music, the costumes, the scenery. It was just lovely. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Vivian.
Great. Okay, and then the next question comes from one of SSTCI's board members, who is, and I just lost her because I lowered her hand and it sent her little square elsewhere. Now I found her. Janelle Cortez with Groove Fit and Groove Travel, who recently did a program for us on Cuban culture.
Hello, everyone. Oh, Reemberto, that was so lovely. Thank you so much. I got nostalgic. I know that wasn't the point of your presentation. And I actually just wanted to just let you know real quick, my husband's going to be, is actually traveling to Cuba tomorrow morning. It's going to be very interesting to see what he has to say when he gets back. He's going to start off in Havana, and then he's going to make his way across the country all the way to Moa. And as you know, recently, transportation has been an absolute nightmare. So even just flying into the country was a bit of a hassle, because they just opened up the airport for travel that was bigger than just Canada internationally. So it's going to be quite interesting, and I will definitely have to go to Denizens and talk about that. I just wanted to chime in real quick on the question that Lisa asked about the resilience of the people. And I wanted to piggyback on what Reemberto was talking about as far as the importance of the arts and it being, really a fabric of Cuban culture. Fidel Castro, he was a big proponent and a supporter of the arts. And I think that played very heavily that played a huge role in the education of a lot of Cuban people. Unlike in a lot of cultures, if someone like my husband, who's a musician, if someone wanted to study either music or painting or things like that, it was very heavily encouraged in schools. And it wasn't a thing that was shunned by society in a way that even in our own culture, being an artist would make, someone's mom or dad be like, oh, geez, what is this going to turn out to be like? So there is that artistic freedom that is supported even in education. And I think that when you have that and you have the ability to really, study for free, and, literacy is one of the highest in all of Latin America. And when you have education and arts at your fingertips, and you get to rely on that, even in the hardest of times, I think that it's helpful to be able to have that creative outlet. So I just wanted to say that really quickly.
I'd be remiss though, if I didn't push back. Number one, okay. What good is education if Virginia has wonderful education, the state of Virginia, but if they start taking the books away and you can't read certain books, what good is education? And so in Cuba, I would say that it is a very literate nation. But what good is that if you can't select the books that you can read? And the thing about, I would not attribute one iota of credit to Fidel for the artistic nature of Cubans. I think there have been Cuba's artistic roots go well beyond the previous 6 decades, and there have been amazing people. Alicia Alonso, who was such an instrumental ballet person internationally. The great historian that we mentioned earlier, Eusebio Leal, who did such a wonderful job in preserving Havana against all odds, and the amazing, and outside of Havana, throughout the island, the folk art that you see throughout the island, including the religious art within the underground for many decades, since 1960, the Catholic Church, but also the more openly Santeria. So the artistic nature of Cuba is I would not attribute it to any one leader.
Oh, no, that's not what I did, but we'll continue this conversation later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Janelle. And Janelle is on SSTCI's board of directors. And she also has a company. She didn't mention Groove Travel. And I think you go to Cuba, right, Janelle? She said yes. Okay. So check out Groove Travel. Maybe put it in the chat for folks. Next up, we have Natalie Ambrose.
Yes, thank you. Hello. I'm actually just next door. I'm in Washington, D.C. And a good friend of mine who lives in Silver Spring told me about tonight's talk and told me about your organization. Thank you, Lisa and Reemberto. Actually, the reason my friend, her name is Kathleen Emmett Samii, she told me about tonight was because actually I was born in Cuba right before the revolution. And my father, who's in his 90s, is on the line tonight too. I told him about this. So he's Zooming. He's in Florida. That's Tom Ambrose. But anyway, my dad and I have been back to Cuba a number of times in the last decade or so. He's a retired petroleum geologist, and he went to Cuba in 56, 57 to look for oil with a Louisiana company, Kiwani, that ultimately was expropriated. But anyway, we're both very pro-Cuba. We're, for the most part, pro-Fidel. My father gets hot under the collar when he thinks of the Miami Cubans. and they're pushed back for a couple of generations now. But anyway, one question he was curious about and wanted me to ask is about the preservation, the historic preservation of the buildings. You know, who's paying for this? The last time we were in Cuba, which was about 2015 or so, I don't recall the Capitol looking like it does now. And also his question was about the embargo. If the embargo was lifted, would that help, you know, get money into Cuba? Or are the Chinese and the Russians or whomever picking up the slack, or the Europeans or whatever?
The Cuban, Eusebio Leal was instrumental in setting up Cuba's only totally independent corporation that could receive money from elsewhere, as long as it was devoted exclusively to preservation. And he single-handedly was able to spearhead and bring in UNESCO and the International Association of Cultural Monuments. And so through that movement, and now there's Cuba has, Havana is a World Heritage Site. And there are many of these World Heritage Sites throughout the world. Cuba has a handful. So that the historic preservation side is the money for the capital. Actually, supposedly came exclusively from inside the Cuban government. Think taxes and expropriation and whatever else, this how different governments in different parts of the world amass capital. But for other parts of it, I know the construction for the Capitol was actually a German company, because that's what it said in, we went when it was still under construction, and that's what it said in the outside. And remember that there is only one country in the world that has an embargo on Cuba, and that's the US. So to blame the embargo for stuff is like, wait, time out. So it's a complicated matter. Obviously, I disagree vehemently with yours and your father's perception of Fidel, and we've come a time, it's been 63 years, that if you're sick for 63 years and you're taking one medication, you'd think that you'd be wise enough to change the medication that you're taking. So you'd like to think that there are other avenues, and I am totally convinced that the Biden administration, in its negotiating its political reality with many of my cousins and my family in South Florida, who were and are deeply hurt and personally, and these are not like rich folks that had this and that. These are like myself, campesinos from the Cuban hinterlands, etc. And so it's a complicated matter. So I think there is a growing consensus that we need to build, and I'll give credit to Ike Leggett, our past county executive, for the terminology of we need to build a bigger table where people, even though we have totally diverse opinions about what the future may hold, that we can sit around the same table without shooting spears at each other's and hating each other. But the history is deep and the hurt is real. And so that's where we're at. So, but the embargo stuff, personally, I'm like, lift the damn thing, let it go away. Some of my fellow Cuban Americans will tell me that is the stupidest thing that you could do. And so there's I think we want to listen to people's authentic opinions on this.
Yes, and I certainly didn't mean to, that's the problem when you get, as you know, like you say, Cuba is so complicated. Actually, it's interesting. Part of the year, it's a long story, but I live in Puerto Rico. I've been in old San Juan since 1996. So the other wing of the dove or whatever. So I'm fascinated by Cuba. I see, Puerto Rico's having its own problems, but you're so right about what we call the Miami Cubans. No, I guess what I meant by that is the contrast when I said that my dad and I are kind of, we're pro-Fidel or whatever. It's just in contrast to the corruption of Batista and all that, that era, the mob, and Cuba's got such a long and crazy history.
But if I may say there, it's really a disservice to history to say that Cuba has been under a dictatorship for 62 years. Cuba has actually been under a dictatorship for 70 years, because the 7 years in the 50th of Fulgencio Batista was a dictatorship, but it's a dictatorship nonetheless. And so it's a diverse opinion. Bringing it back to the arts, I see Janelle expressing, saying, "Hey, whoa, wait a minute! The Periodo Especial Arts program, we're there. If you want to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer, this education is available to you." Except, Janelle, I can't, and I won't let it go, because just to be factual in a group of however many people are attending, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, for some unbeknownst reason, the Cuban Constitution has said that you can't be an architect and you can't be a tourist guide. And so it's like stupid things like that you go like, what were they thinking? So there is a and the disparity and the that is happening, where you have doctors leaving the profession to be tourist guides. So anyway, all of that is probably another conversation.
Yeah, I've taken way too much of your time and the others, but wow, I look forward to signing up for your course sometime remotely. And thank you very much, Lisa, for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Natalie in DC. And now we have time for a few more questions. Just raise your hand and unmute when I call on you. So our next question comes from Lisa Knoll.
Hi, I was in Cuba at the time that Fidel took over from Batista. My brother was a musician, and so he was running around trying to buy up. Actually, comes out of the classical world. He was interested in avant-garde, modern Cuban music, and he had a whole list of composers he was looking for. And when he went to the record stores, he couldn't find them, because under the Batista regime, those records had been hidden under the shelves at the record stores he went to, because those particular musicians in 1960 had gone off to join Fidel. Now, whatever happened to them, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of disillusionment at that time, I gather, with the artists who initially joined with Fidel, and they may have all become exiles. I don't know. But then the next time I felt really engaged with Cuba was actually when I was in London in about 1966 or so. There was a theater festival that featured contemporary Cuban playwrights. And these were people who were writing and producing plays under the Cuban Revolution. And they were rather critical. They were really exciting, trendy, engaged with other Latin American streams of thought coming out of South America and Latin America. And they were very hip, trendy plays. They were beautifully written. They weren't really popular culture. They were serious. They were very serious, thoughtful plays coming out. And I remember in London, people were saying, how could they be writing? How could there be such a broad tolerance of social critique coming out of Cuba? This was in about 66. And the reigning thought was, as long as you weren't critical of the revolution, as long as your experiments in the arts were not specifically disloyal to the revolution, there was still a lot of room for social commentary and social criticism. Well, now we've seen a lot of artists become persecuted or enter into rebellions or protests since then. But I want to know what's going on in the Cuban theater scene. Is there a theater scene?
Great point regarding the Cuba theater scene. It took in the last few months, the number one dissident sparked by the San Isidro movement over a year ago. The number one dissident of note is a theater person. His name is Junior Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
And he called for a protest back November 15th, recently, which basically, even though the new Cuban constitution clearly says that you can do protests, it was clamped down. It was not allowed to happen. So there is no doubt in anyone's, there can be no doubt that freedom of expression, think China, think the young lady that has been shut down, the tennis player. It's a reality that the artists deal with in Cuba. Having said that, even within those realities that you can't control as an artist, you do your art the best you can. In many cases, some have chosen to go into exile, and we're going through that in Cuba at the moment. And so it is. I see Janelle. I love it. I'm going to translate it. Janelle put in quotation marks. No es fácil. It's not easy, and I know it's an overused phrase, but it is complicated. So anyway, I'll stop it there.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. I was wondering, in a nutshell, how would you describe the architecture of Cuba, Reemberto, to someone who knows nothing about it, just from a historically and stylistically?
The architecture of Cuba is an array of styles from the Spanish colonial to some, like the cathedral, some introduction of Baroque, to the 20th century modernism, particularly in the residential area, and some of the best-known Cuban architects from the early part of the middle of the 20th century, doing some international style type architecture. In the last 6 decades, there has been no architecture of note until recently with the modern day hotels. And I think it was Ken that said earlier, last thing he wants to see is a bunch of McDonald's. Last thing I want to see is a bunch of these new hotels look like anywhere USA or anywhere in the world. They're just not respective of the context in which they appear. So, but anyway, that's a short answer.
You mentioned there's a neighborhood with the typical kind of Soviet architecture, which I'm very
That is
familiar with.
fascinating because
Tell us
now
more about that.
I want to make sure that those of us that care about urban planning and architecture, this was not unique to Havana, right? The Eastern Bloc architecture, the drab blocks of buildings, actually came into the United States as well. In the famous Pruitt-Igoe housing development in St. Louis that had to be literally torn down because it was a failed social experiment. They designed these buildings that were just blocks, 10 stories tall. It's like putting birds in cages, if you will. And this was throughout the world. In Havana, it's restricted to a barrio, Havana del Este, which is pretty unique in that it's totally different. You go by there and you say, wait a minute, I'm not in Havana. And so that is the La Historia de La Habana del Este. It's a Soviet bloc type architecture with no services. And again, it's fascinating because it's not unique to Cuba. It's not only in the Eastern Bloc, but also in New York City. Some of the buildings and those bad designs from the 60s and into the 70s of public housing that were god-awful.
Great. Well, I would be curious to visit nonetheless, and hopefully I'll be able to go in 2022 on a special trip with you.
Absolutely.
Or 2023, you said you recommended not going.
2023, and I must say, because Janelle is awesome.
Yeah.
Janelle, so I stayed close to the Russian embassy, and that is a brutalist. That brutalist design that was right after the revolution. They built the Russians built that. And it's amazing. It's this core brutalist building, kind of like the FBI in DC. Let's just put it this way: ugly architecture has no boundaries.
That's true. And then there's also the safety issue, which is actually more important. Above all else, the safety issue. Although those buildings are usually pretty sturdy.
but you're absolutely right. The community safety issue. I mean, these things are like, they are not safe, and you've had to retrofit them. So it's like, I did want to say something about the safety in Cuba. As in any heavily controlled autocratic state with strong multiple police presence, which you don't see. In the 6 trips I've been to Cuba, I've always felt extremely safe. And I've been throughout Havana at odd hours. And mind you, in part, no one but the government is allowed to have guns. And you can, kind of explain it away. But the fact is that you can walk the streets of most, not all, most of Havana. I mean, there is a video that I will share with you guys also by Silvio Rodriguez, kind of like the Bob Dylan of the Cuban Revolution, very critical of the neighborhoods in Havana that have been left unaddressed. So anyway, I better keep it there. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Well, we have time for another question or two, and we have the next question comes from Michelle Cohen.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Reemberto, for putting on this presentation and making sure to invite me. So the person, I can't remember who it was exactly, who asked, how would you describe architecture? And this is, of course, in no way to take over from Reemberto, who is the expert and will be having a whole entire university course on this. And hopefully most people are, if not able to sign up for it, then able to go to the local breweries and hang out and chat about it. But I put in the chat, the word is eclectic. And that is entirely true to what he's speaking about. There's colonial architecture, there's Baroque style, there are lovely Art Deco buildings, and particularly the Nuevo Vedado neighborhood is a particularly Art Deco style homes and community, or neighborhood rather. And these hideous Russian blocks, because that's literally all they are, is giant rectangles. So there's a little bit of everything. Unfortunately, a good deal of it is in decay and disrepair, and of course, in Reemberto's course, he's going to speak to preservation efforts. I'm very well connected with the preservation enterprises in the country, in Cuba. I have a little apartment in Havana Vieja, and so I'm right in the Casco Histórico, the historical district. And I can't wait to hear more from Reemberto. So I suggest everybody either go to the bar or become a University of Maryland student. And yeah, and of course you can always hit me up for information too. I am not going to take away his thunder though.
But thank you, Michelle, because
the word.
your experience is unique. Your experience is unique, and for a much longer story regarding how Michelle literally became a person in Cuba that has an apartment and travels to Cuba, and so your comments on architecture are spot on. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And so Michelle is lives in Cuba part-time, you're saying? Great. Well, we'll have to get her address so we can visit. Great. Okay, well, I think that does it. If there's any final questions, I have time for another. If not, maybe Reemberto can tell us. Go ahead, Reemberto.
No, Lisa, I just wanted to, before you close shop, I just wanted to thank everybody that asked questions, and because it's not unlike other quote political subject matters, this subject matter on Cuba can easily go off the rails. My commitment is to be to talk with one and all across the whatever spectrum, and to help build a bigger table that Ike Leggett so exemplified, where folks from all walks of life can really continue this conversation in a civil and decent way. So thank you guys for asking the hard questions, and I hope that my responses were not too knee-jerk.
No, it was great, Reemberto. Thank you for such a rich discussion, and I wish I could have gotten into your course, but I'll have to wait till the next one. Hopefully you'll have another, more of them planned.
Will do.
So thank you again to everyone for joining us, and thank you, Reemberto Rodriguez, for a wonderful program.
Adios, gente. Adios.
Adios. Feliz Navidad.
Feliz Navidad. Yes.